On the 8th of July 1875, the crew of the Pauline encountered something strange while sailing about 20 miles from Cape São Roque, situated on the northeast side of Brazil. The ship's captain, George Drevar, quickly wrote down the salient facts about the encounter. Initially, the weather was fine and clear, with moderate wind and sea conditions. However, at roughly 11 o'clock in the morning, the crew noticed some black spots on the water, as well as a whitish pillar about 35 feet high above them. Upon closer inspection, Drevar realized the unusual sighting was a giant sea serpent, coiled twice around a large sperm whale. The two oceanic titans were supposedly locked in a deadly embrace. In short, a battle to the death. Driven mad by the sea, a misidentification of an otherwise known marine animal, or a true monster from the depths. This chilling encounter left a lasting impression on the crew of the Pauline, most especially the captain, who found himself stranded on the path to sea monster mania and the Old Bailey, where he was put on trial. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. Before we delve too deeply into this case, I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce the sponsor of this video, Hyperfever, an all-new, all-exciting, most mobile of all mobile games combining UFOs and bizarre creatures with bubble-popping relaxation and casual hardcore battle royale in an offline, online, and quite frankly, ridiculous setting. The advert was fake, I apologize, but something that is real and is certain not to disappoint is the one and only Raid Shadow Legends, the actual sponsor of this video. You ought to know by now that Raid Shadow Legends is a long-standing, much-loved free-to-play mobile game with a strategic, in-depth RPG battle system, outstanding graphics, intense boss fights, and of course over 700 unique champions to collect. And not only that, Raid has been supporting my channel for several years now, meaning as well as bringing you fantastical in-game monsters, they through their sponsorships help to illuminate upon quite possibly real-life ones as well. And the monsters, their looks, their lore have to be my favourite part of Raid. And to increase the excitement, this April Raid is going on an egg hunt, quite suitably for dragon eggs. Just download Raid Shadow Legends using my links below, copy your in-game player ID, then head over to egghunt.polarium.com from now until the 15th of May, where new players can win fantastic in-game items and even Amazon gift cards with a total value of $20,000. So that is one monster sighting you do not want to miss. Given all of this reliably monsterific fun, if you haven't started playing Raid yet, what are you waiting for? New players, use my link or scan the QR code on screen and get a free starter pack including all of this fabulous in-game loot. You can even find me under the name Laura and join my clan. Simply click my link in the description. Thank you. Now on with the video. Despite their mythical reputation, there have been numerous reported sightings of giant sea serpents throughout history. During the 19th century especially, a multitude of strange tales emerged regarding such creatures. Notably, a considerable number of these were provided by what are considered to be credible sources and witnesses who were willing to publicly share their experiences. And one such individual was Captain George Drevar, who had not one but two encounters with a sea monster. At the time of his trial in 1881, Drevar was reported as being a 48-year-old Scotchman, although no relevant records of a George Drevar could be found in the National Records of Scotland. However, a George Drevar born in Dublin in 1833, who became an apprentice in 1849, and who received his second and first mate certificates in 1856 and 57 respectively, may be the same man. And certainly by his own account, Drevar first went to sea in 1848, and by 1855 had become a second mate, also having survived his first shipwreck. He claimed that he was stranded for 6 months on the island of Agalega, something that seems to be supported by the reports of the Mauritius Commercial Gazette of 1856. Several years later, between 1862 and 63, Drevar was in charge of a brig on the Australian coast which he named after himself. Later again, in 1863, he travelled to England and sailed the Shamrock from Plymouth to Cuba. In 1864, he served as the master of the Drevar out of Whangaroa, Australia. Then, by 1870, he was commanding the Como, which sank in the middle of the ocean due to unstable cargo, forcing the crew to abandon ship. And so it was that a well-qualified and experienced Drevar became the captain of the Pauline, a 587-ton American-built bark owned by G.C. Trufant by June 1871. In the summer of 1875, the Pauline set sail from Newcastle with a shipment of coal for HMS London in Zanzibar. To benefit from the favourable northeasterly trade winds, the ship had to cross the Atlantic. Thus, in July 1875, while passing the coast of Cape São Roque in Brazil, the Pauline was on course to encounter the legendary sea serpent. According to Drevar's notes, the first encounter with the sea serpent on the 8th of July lasted no more than 15 minutes, and finished with the tail portion of the constricted whale being elevated straight in the air, then waving backwards and forwards and lashing the water furiously in the last death struggle. The whole body of the whale, so the captain explained, disappeared from view, going down head foremost towards the bottom, where it no doubt was gorged at the serpent's leisure. After all, the head and tail of the serpent, each about 30 feet long, were, according to Drevar, acting as horrific levers, with the creature twisting itself and its victim around with great velocity. Watched by the crew, the serpent sank out of sight about every 2 minutes, returning to the surface still revolving. Incredibly, it was claimed that the struggles of the whale and 2 other whales that were near, frantic with excitement, made the sea in the vicinity look like a boiling cauldron, and a loud and confused noise was distinctly heard. Undoubtedly, Drevar's description of the monster was highly detailed and showed that the creature was a formidable and dangerous one. He estimated that the serpent was about 160 or 170 feet long and 7 or 8 in girth, allowing for 2 coils around the ensnared whale. Given that sperm whales are the largest of the toothed whales and the largest toothed predator on Earth, that another creature was allegedly able to predate on it so thoroughly is no small thing. Drevar also described the serpent's colour to be much like a conger eel. Its head, the mouth being always open, appeared, he explained, to be the largest part of the body. And not only was the battle between the whale and the monster colossal, it was also witnessed by 2 of the largest sperm whales that Drevar had ever seen. These whales are said to have moved slowly towards the vessel, their bodies more than usually elevated out of the water, and not spouting or making the least noise, but seeming quite paralysed with fear. The captain himself noted that he felt a cold shiver pass through his frame on witnessing the last agonizing struggle of the poor whale, which seemed as helpless in the coils of the serpent as a small bird in the talons of a hawk. Reflecting upon the chilling encounter in his notes thereafter, Captain Drevar wrote that he was aware that few believed in the existence of sea serpents, and many argued that they should be more frequently sighted by the numerous vessels constantly traversing the ocean if they were real. However, according to him, the north coast of Brazil, known for its large reptiles, is a region particularly conducive to the growth of sea monsters. Indeed, situated in the mid-torrid zone, the temperature of the water and air rarely falls below 81 degrees Fahrenheit. Moreover, the shoreline stretches for thousands of miles, bordered by a coral wall, while numerous banks and reefs lie some distance from the coast. He suggested that the serpent may have possessed a degree of cunning mentioned in Christian scriptures, for it exhibited enough discretion not to leave a secure habitat and wander the oceans like other fish, which could have resulted in capture and torture for human amusement or profit. And so, as far as the captain was concerned, São Roque in particular was likely a good feeding ground, as it served as a landmark for whales migrating from the south to the North Atlantic, and provided ample warm currents so as to make an ideal breeding ground for the serpentine monster. The seasoned sailor was so convinced by what he had seen that, in the same account, he also wrote about appearing before some authority and testify on oath alongside his first and second mates of the crew that his claims were true. But little did he know that he would see the sea serpent again before he had a chance to do that, some 80 miles east of his previous sighting. According to his account, on the morning of the 13th of July, Drevar was astonished to see the same or a similar monster, throwing its head about 40 feet of its body in a horizontal position out of the water as it passed onwards by the stern of the vessel. He even mused upon why his crew was so much favoured with such a strange visitor, and concluded that the band of white paint, 2 feet wide above the copper on the Pauline, might have looked like a fellow serpent to it, and no doubt attracted its attention. Describing the creature as the Great Leviathan, the captain claimed that it elevated itself some 60 feet in the air and looked grimly towards his vessel. Knowing what the beast had done to the whale, the crew immediately armed themselves so as to fend it off should it attack the Pauline. But the incident remained only a threat, one that left its witnesses utterly terrified and eager to warn the world about the monster and the secrets that the ocean guards well. As the captain wrote, his claims and statements were strictly true, and the encounter was witnessed by his officers, half the crew and himself, and they were ready at any time to testify on oath that it was so, and that they were not in the least mistaken. And so, when the Pauline arrived in Zanzibar, Drevar and his crew told the tale of what they had seen to the chaplain of the HMS London, Reverend E.L. Penny. And on the 17th of November 1875, the newspaper The Scotsman reported the earliest version of the incident, followed by a more detailed account provided in a letter and a sketch sent to the Illustrated London News by the Reverend. Then, on the 22nd of November 1877, several newspapers printed the account of the second officer of the Pauline, Mr. Landals, confirming the previous reports regarding the first encounter with the serpent, although the number of whales present increased. According to the second officer's claims, there were several whales altogether, perhaps 4 or 5. They were all large ones, and the largest one was the victim in this case. The same as Drevar, he described how the animal was completely in the coils of the tremendous serpent. It had 2 complete turns round the body of the whale in the thickest part, and had it completely in its power. Horrifically, Landals even detailed how the whale was in agony, either of pain or terror, perhaps both, and was continually throwing itself half out of the water. Drevar himself corresponded with the press thereafter, confirming Landau's account and focusing strongly on the first encounter with the monstrous creature, suggesting that it may very well be the Leviathan of the Book of Job. Such sensational claims put Drevar under the spotlight, who was described by press correspondents as a shrewd, hard-headed Scotchman, and ridiculed in news articles as a sea serpent monomaniac. And indeed, Drevar may have come across as such, for he was adamant that the monster was real. So much so that he set out to hunt and capture similar specimens to prove his claims. After the incident with the Pauline, Drevar served as the captain and co-owner of the Norfolk, which he sailed to India. According to a letter he wrote in May 1878 to the Commercial Gazette, he claimed to have captured a striped sea serpent off Singapore. This serpent would be but one of a series in Drevar's later collection of natural history specimens, which he claimed to have captured off Bangladesh and Australia. Supposedly, he even retrieved one from the stomach of a shark and sent it to the Sydney Museum in 1887. Although the Norfolk served him well in his sea serpent pursuits, the ship was eventually wrecked. And so it was that an investigation into the shipwreck began in September 1879, shedding light on the series of unfortunate events that caused the incident to happen. It seemed to the investigators that Drevar had charted a course that led the Norfolk directly onto the reef instead of avoiding it. The ship's cargo of groundnuts had somehow obstructed the pumps, and to operate the pumps, the lookout was removed from his primary duty, which caused the boat to collide with the reef. The wreck commissioner, Rothery, held Drevar and the second officer, who had apparent alcohol issues, accountable. Consequently, Drevar's captain's license was suspended for 6 months. This decision had a significant impact on Drevar, whose experience with the sea serpent was also brought into question by Rothery. Additionally, Drevar believed that the logbook, which Rothery or the Wreck Commission had kept, would have vindicated him in regards to the unfortunate fate of the Norfolk. Thus, feeling belittled and wronged and seeking justice, Drevar began writing letters to Rothery, the head of maritime affairs at the Board of Trade, Thomas Gray, and seemingly for good measure, the colonial secretary, the Earl of Kimberley. The contents of the letters, surmised from newspaper reports, expressed regret at first, but soon turned to threats and demeaning comments. For example, on the 31st of January 1880, Drevar sent letters to Gray and Rothery, calling Rothery an unfeeling brute, and then another in which he demanded recompense, employment, or an asylum. If his request was not granted, he threatened to hold the nation accountable for the blood of himself and another, swiftly calling Rothery a modern Jesuit. Eventually, the authorities were called to step in, and Drevar was apprehended by the police. He was initially arrested on the 12th of April 1881 and detained on remand before appearing for his first hearing at Bow Street Magistrates' Court on the 25th of that month. Inspector Swanson of Scotland Yard, who would later investigate the infamous Jack the Ripper case, carried out the arrest. While in custody, Drevar made a threat to shoot Rothery as the latter was sitting in court, as well as a threat to shoot himself. Then, in a bizarre twist, Drevar presented the arresting officers with a preserved specimen of a sea serpent in spirits, as well as pamphlets about the creature, similar to a booklet he wrote later in 1889. According to the news reports from April 1881, the provenance of the serpent was said to be from South Africa or the Indian Ocean, and it was supposedly caught in the act of swallowing a fish. And so it was that even whilst in custody, Drevar was determined to convince others as to the legitimacy of his sea serpent sightings. Drevar was initially charged with 2 different offences, making threats and libel against Rothery and the Earl. On his first arrest, he was deemed a monomaniac by the prison doctor, suffering, according to 19th century psychiatry, from partial insanity conceived as single pathological preoccupation, in this case with sea monsters, in an otherwise sound mind. Yet, by the time of his trial in May, the captain was considered sane. At the trial, Drevar pleaded guilty to the charge of libel. The charges of threatening behaviour were, for some unknown reasons, dropped. Drevar's defence barrister, a Mr. Mead, called witnesses to attest to Drevar's good character, and argued that Drevar's belief in the sea serpent's existence, coupled with the incredulity he faced, the loss of his ship, the injustice he felt over the wreck report, and his financial ruin, had led to a temporary mental breakdown. The defence further argued that Drevar's intention with the letters was to gain publicity rather than inflict harm. However, the defence did admit that Drevar had been delusional about the existence of the sea serpent, but that he was otherwise sane. During sentencing, Mr. Justice Denman expressed sympathy for Drevar's situation, but felt that his threatening behaviour towards the Commissioner, who had a kind and tender regard for those under his jurisdiction, could not be overlooked. And so Drevar was sentenced to 3 months in prison without hard labour. He was bonded for £50 to stay away from Rothery, and another £50 to keep the peace for the next 12 months. Newspapers at the time were sympathetic towards Drevar, with the Birmingham Mail stating that he should have received medical care and pity rather than imprisonment. And so, on all counts, the media, the courts, his own defence barrister, it seems as though Drevar was considered mentally ill. Perhaps even Drevar himself believed that he had been deluded, having pleaded suffering from a temporary mental breakdown in order to secure a lesser sentence. And yet he remained passionate about sea serpents, and even during his imprisonment continued to write letters and pamphlets advocating their existence. However, upon his release he, perhaps wisely, shifted his focus to his other great obsession, inventing life-saving equipment. Drawing on his shipwreck survival experiences, he created a range of inventions, including a life-saving raft made from a cask barrel and surrounded by oars that could be assembled quickly. Following a period of recovery, he showcased his inventions, including the raft, at the Great International Fisheries Exhibition in London, where he was awarded for his efforts. Then, in 1889, Drevar's booklet on the sea serpent was published. Believed to be a republication of the pamphlets he had shown to the police in 1881, the booklet was his last publication about his experience. In it, he claimed that he had been treated unjustly in 1879 and expressed his hope to reveal more about the matter someday, which presumably referred to the criminal case against him. Sadly, he would not have the chance to do so. In early January 1890, Drevar drowned as he saved the life of a young boy overturned in one of his cask rafts. The local newspapers gave him a flattering obituary for his travels, life-saving inventions, and heroic death. However, they made no mention of his conviction or his fascination with sea serpents. Drevar is remembered as a vibrantly coloured and enigmatic sailor. Many still wonder if he was indeed the hard-headed Scotchman described by the Times, a devout Christian who saw his sighting as proof of the biblical Leviathan, or an unstable individual who threatened the wreck commission of the Norfolk. Whatever the case, his accounts of encountering sea serpents have become classic in the field of marine cryptozoology. Certainly, his first encounter, when Drevar supposedly watched as the serpent coiled itself twice around the whale so as to drag it below the surface, has, via a scene drawn by Reverend Penny based on the crew's accounts, become the 19th century poster of maritime folklore. Even so, for many, most especially from the stance of current scientific understanding, find it challenging to conceive such an occurrence. This is all the more difficult considering how the creature that Drevar claimed to have seen left no traces for us to investigate. That said, Robert France, an ecologist at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, has put forward a theory to explain the sea monster tales recounted by Drevar and other sailors. France proposes that the incident was likely a struggle between a dying whale and fishing equipment that had been discarded and was dragging it down. In late 2016, France published a series of papers in maritime history journals in which he postulated that many of the reported sightings of sea monsters during the 19th and early 20th centuries were actually instances of whales, sea turtles, and other marine creatures becoming ensnared in such marine debris. In particular, France pored over works by scientists Bernard Heuvelmans and A.C. Aldermans, which collected accounts of sea serpent sightings dating as far back as the mid-17th century. He discovered that the characteristics that sailors attributed to sea serpents, such as the presence of a long tail, were often inferred and could have been due to trailing debris. Upon analysing several hundred accounts, France found that nearly a fifth of them contained details that led him to suspect entanglement as the cause of the sighting. For instance, sea monsters with humps could have been fishing floats, with Heuvelmans even using the term string of buoys to describe one such monster. And while it may seem unbelievable that an experienced sailor would mistake an entangled whale for a sea monster, France argues that it is not impossible under certain circumstances, when things may not be what they appear to be. Especially at sea, optical illusions and psychological distress can lead to impaired judgment. And so perhaps an explanation. And yet, even then, France himself can be said to make easy assumptions. That a sailor could so easily confuse the living, writhing tail of a Leviathan with the lifeless flotsam of man-made debris. And critically, if we are to agree that he was indeed able to explain away nearly a fifth of accounts as entanglement, that still leaves very, very many reports of encounters with alleged sea monsters unexplained. It can therefore be said that, just as it might be difficult for skeptics to entertain the possibility of hitherto unproven deep-sea monsters, it is equally as difficult to so simply wave away the sure and detailed reports of experienced seamen like Drevar. After all, Drevar, one can argue, ruined his life by sharing his experience aboard the Pauline. Of course, one might take the stance of the Eastern Morning News, which wrote that whilst Captain Drevar was an able man of excellent character who had many successful voyages, he went wrong on sea serpents. A religious man, he allowed his faith to mislead him, blinding him to reality, so much so that once his religion got mixed up with sea serpents, there was no chance for him. And while such might be true, it must also be said that we must be careful when making such sweeping statements in which belief becomes an all too easy target for ridicule and material scorn. Let us not forget that the greatest geniuses in history, to whom we, the modern person, owe so much, had tremendous religious conviction. Faith, despite what the modern atheist mind might preach, does not necessarily make one an imbecile. And so the debate over the existence of sea serpents remains unsolved. Undoubtedly, the vast unexplored depths of the ocean provide ample opportunity for discoveries, with some experts indeed believing that their existence cannot be entirely ruled out. Regardless of whether they are real or simply part of maritime folklore, the allure of giant water serpents and the mysteries of the deep are indelible, and continue to captivate us and ensnare the minds of those who venture at sea, just as they did the eccentric and impassioned Captain George Drevar all those years ago. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and are anxious for more paranormal content, I recently launched an all-new channel in which I will be sharing some of my more personal research and paranormal explorations. So please do take a look at that, and if you like what you see, subscribe and perhaps even join me for my next premiere. The link is both on screen and in the description. Thank you again. Until next time.